Before you open your eyes, let's take a few more minutes to see if we can generate a positive motivation as our reason for being here tonight. All of us sometimes feel the wish to benefit others. For some people it rises often, almost all the time. For others it may be more rare. But we all do feel it, at least sometimes, the wish that we could help others, help the world, do things that are beneficial. So try to remember a time when you did feel that way, when you really wanted to do good for others and for the world. And see if you can bring that same feeling back into your mind now. And feel the wish, the aspiration that what we are doing here, what we're doing here for peace and as possible. If that seems realistic and doable and something you would like to do, then you could bring that in as well. You could feel the wish that what we are doing here tonight will help us get closer to enlightenment. And then when you feel ready to, you can open your eyes, relax, sit in whatever way is comfortable for you. Tonight I'm planning to talk about study, why it's good to do study in the Buddhist tradition. And this is related to tomorrow's program, because tomorrow I'm going to be going into some topics of Buddhist philosophy. And this is actually part of a program I've been doing in Copenhagen for the last month or so. And so I don't know if any of you have been following that program, watching the videos, but even if you haven't, I'll try to make all this material as relevant and useful for everyone. So meditation has become, I think, quite popular in the West. It seems that more and more people are taking up the practice of meditation, and also more and more people are taking an interest in Buddhism. And there is an idea that some people have, and also even some teachers and some books express this idea, that if you practice meditation, if you want to follow the path of meditation, then it's not a good idea to study, to read a lot of books, because it just brings up more thoughts, more conceptualizations, more sort of blah, blah, blah in the mind. And that kind of mental activity it doesn't have a place in the practice of meditation, and can be a hindrance to the practice of meditation. So I don't know if you've ever come across this idea. Have you ever heard this idea, or no? Well, I have. Some some people talk like that, and also some retreats that are held. If you attend this retreat, you're advised not to read any books. You shouldn't read books. Yeah? Yeah. So I think it's a similar idea, that reading can just stir up a lot of thoughts in the mind and conceptualizations, and that those shouldn't be there when you practice meditation. And I understand to a certain extent why this kind of idea comes about, because sometimes it can happen that people, read a lot of spiritual books, and they may develop and, accumulate a lot of knowledge, and they never get around to practicing it, They just have all this knowledge in their heads, but they don't actually do the practice, which isn't correct from the Buddhist point of view, because the Dharma, the teachings that were given by the Buddha and by other masters since the Buddha's time, all those teachings are meant to be practiced. They're meant to use to work on ourselves, to work on our mind. And so it's not really correct to just keep it in our heads, keep it on the intellectual level, on the conceptual level, and not actually ever get around to practicing it. But on the other hand, is it correct to say that we should not read books, we should not study, we should not think or analyze or conceptualize, that kind of thing should be totally pushed aside and avoided? Is that correct? So this idea isn't something new, because there's a story in the history of Tibet. Buddhism started coming into Tibet, I think around 6th, 7th centuries. And there's a story that in the 8th century, there was a Chinese monk. They call him, the Tibetans call him Hashang Mahayana. I don't know what his real name was, but anyway, that's what they call him. And he was teaching a kind of meditation where he said, you should just stop thinking. Don't have any thoughts at all, because all thoughts are obstacles, they are hindrances. And he used the analogy of clouds. He said, whether the clouds are white or the clouds are black, they obscure the sky. Okay, so in a similar way, he said, whether you have good thoughts or you have bad thoughts, they obscure your mind. They prevent you from being able to see the true nature of things. They are obstacles. So he said, get rid of all thoughts, all concepts. So that was his, apparently, this is the story. I don't know how true it is, but that's the story. So he was teaching this kind of meditation, completely non-conceptual meditation. And apparently it was quite popular. Many people were attracted to this type of meditation. But there were also masters from India, such as Shantarakshita, Kamalashila, some really great Indian masters who came to Tibet and were teaching the Indian tradition of Buddhism, which does teach the importance of studying, the texts, the philosophical texts, and also meditating on what you learn, which involves using thought, using analysis. And so there were these two camps, two traditions. One saying, don't think, don't conceptualize. Another saying, no, it's good to think. Sometimes, not all the time, but there is a place for thought and concepts. And apparently the king of Tibet was concerned about the situation, so he organized a debate between these two camps, the Chinese monk on one side, and then this Indian master, whose name was Kamalashila, on the other side. And so these two debated, and in the end it was decided that Kamalashila won. What he was saying was more correct, more valid. And so this other, the Chinese monk was kicked out of Tibet. He was told to leave and stop teaching his method of meditation. And so it seems, I read in one book by a Western scholar that this story is found in all the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are 4 main schools. There's the Nyingma, the old, the ancient, they call it the ancient tradition, the Kagyu, the Shakya, and the Gelug. Those are the 4 main schools of Buddhism in Tibet. So all 4 of those schools have this story. They tell this story. They know about this story. And so they have a respect for study, philosophical study and debate, and the use of analytical meditation. So that's pretty much set the stage for the development of Tibetan Buddhism. But of course, Tibetan Buddhism doesn't say you only study. It also says that you need to practice meditation. And in a text, in our tradition, the Gelugpa tradition, the founder of this tradition is named Lama Tsongkhapa. We probably have a statue of him somewhere here. Anyway, he was a great Gelugpa. Well, he was the founder of the Gelugpa tradition. He was a great scholar. And at that time, the Gelug tradition hadn't started yet, so he studied under masters of the other traditions, Nyingma and Khargyu and Shakya, and so he had masters in all those schools. But then he developed some innovations in the way that the teachings were taught and practiced and so forth, so it became a new school, the Gelug school. So one of his great texts is called the Lamrim Chenmo, the Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. So this is a text that explains the whole path to enlightenment, everything we have to do, starting from where we are now, being unenlightened, and going all the way up to enlightenment. And in this text, which was written 600 years ago, he also mentions this idea that when you meditate on the path, you shouldn't use analysis. You should only use what's called stabilizing meditation. So in the Tibetan tradition, at least in the Gelugpa tradition, they talk about two main types of meditation. And they say all different types of meditation fall into these two categories or two types of meditation. One they call stabilizing meditation. And that is meditation where you stabilize your mind. We would call it concentration meditation. So it's when you have some object like the breath. It could be the breath, or some people like to use a candle flame or a flower or an image of the Buddha. So you have some object and you train yourself to just stay concentrated, focused on that object. Whenever your mind wanders away, you bring it back to that object. So you try to train your mind to have concentration, single-pointed concentration. So that's one type of meditation. And that type of meditation is for the purpose of developing concentration, a very, focused and, centered, stable state of mind. And when you do that kind of meditation, they say you shouldn't be thinking about other things. Thinking, conceptualizing is to be stopped. So you're just trying to develop single-pointed concentration, non-conceptual, non-discursive. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's one kind of meditation. But then there's this other type of meditation, which they call analytical meditation. And that type of meditation does involve thinking. And it's used to contemplate. We could also call it contemplation or reflection. That type of meditation is used to think about, for example, what the Buddha taught, like the Four Noble Truths and so on, all the various teachings that he taught. And the purpose of that kind of meditation is to have a deeper understanding of what the Buddha taught. So it's like we want the Buddha's teachings to come deeper and deeper into our mind and become part of us, part of our life, so that we're actually living our life according to those teachings. So they're not just like knowledge we have up here in our head, but they don't affect us at all in our life. So we want to avoid that. We want to really integrate the knowledge of the path to enlightenment and make it part of us. So, so you use analytical meditation to develop that kind of quality. The real purpose of analytical meditation, though, is to develop wisdom. So wisdom is a very, very important quality. It's an essential quality, a crucial quality to progress along the path to liberation, to enlightenment, because according to Buddhism, our main problem, the root cause of all of our problems, all of our suffering, is ignorance. Ignorance means we don't understand the true nature of things. We don't see things as they really are. Instead, we see things in distorted ways, in mistaken ways. So that's our basic problem. And to eliminate ignorance, we need wisdom. Wisdom is like the antidote, the remedy to overcome and eliminate ignorance. So without wisdom, there's no way to become free of suffering. There's no way to become, to attain liberation, nirvana, enlightenment, these higher states of mind. So wisdom is really important. And we cannot develop wisdom just with concentration. Just by developing single-pointed concentration, even if you have really fantastic concentration, you can sit there for hours or days or months or years, undistractedly focused on your object. That alone will not bring you wisdom. So the way to develop wisdom is by using analysis, using thought. But this doesn't mean just any kind of thought, just letting your mind go all over the place and think about all kinds of things. It's very specific ways of thinking, where you focus on things, phenomena, and try to understand, how do they really exist? Do they exist the way I see them or not? Am I seeing things correctly or not? So you do, thinking in that way. And to be able to do this kind of meditation properly, you also need to study. You need to, learn how to use your thought in a way that brings about wisdom. So study and thinking and analysis are very much important, crucial to really attain enlightenment, to go all the way to Buddhahood. And so to just reject all thoughts, all concepts, and say, just throw those out, they have no place at all in meditation, Lama Tsongkhapa says this is incorrect, this is mistaken. And does that make sense? Yeah. And he points out that in many scriptures, the classical scriptures, the Buddha and also the Indian masters commentating on the Buddhist teachings, in these scriptures they often talk about meditating on impermanence, meditating on suffering, meditating on loving kindness, meditating on compassion, and so forth. And that kind of meditation is analytical meditation. Yeah, it's not just single-pointed meditation, it's using thought. Because I don't know if you've ever had an experience or a session of doing meditation on loving kindness, but when you do meditation on loving kindness, you need to think about, okay, what is loving kindness? You try to generate this feeling of loving kindness. And then you think about different people, different beings, objects, and you try to generate loving kindness for them. So in doing that, you're using thought, you're using concepts. Yeah, it's not just single-pointedly focusing on one object. Although they say ideally, when we get really good at meditation, what we want to do is combine the two types of meditation. So for example, let's say you're doing a meditation on loving kindness. So you start off by thinking to generate that feeling of loving kindness, and then you try to generate that feeling for all living beings, not leaving out anybody, but feeling loving kindness for all sentient beings. So you need to use thought and, conceptual working of the mind to generate that state of mind. But then if and when you get to the point where you do feel that way, you feel loving kindness for all living beings, then you can stop thinking and just concentrate on that. Just focus single-pointedly on that experience of loving kindness, universal, unconditional loving kindness for all living beings. And that makes it very, very, very powerful. So they say you combine the two types of meditation, using analytical meditation to get yourself into the right state of mind, and then using stabilizing or concentration meditation to stay focused on that experience and try to keep it in your mind as long as possible. So that's the ideal way to practice, to combine the two. But to just say, throw out all your thoughts, throw out all your conceptions, don't think about anything, don't analyze anything, you're missing out on a whole big part of the path. And also another thing that I've heard about, another kind of reasoning for why it's necessary to have analytical meditation is because, you may have heard this before, they say that to reach enlightenment we need two things, method and wisdom, which are like two wings of a bird. And just as a bird can't fly with only one wing, it needs two wings to be able to get off the ground and fly. So in the same way, someone who wants to reach enlightenment needs these two wings, which are called method and wisdom. So wisdom, as I mentioned before, is where we understand the true nature of things. We understand things as they really are, and that's the opposite to ignorance. Method sounds maybe a bit technical, but method includes compassion, love, faith, generosity, helping others, and so forth. So that's a whole other side of the path. But when we need that part of the path, we can't get to enlightenment only with wisdom. We also need this other part, the compassion side, the heart side, the feeling side of the path, the helping of others, and so forth. So for that side of the path, we need to use thoughts and concepts to, like I say, to develop loving kindness, to develop compassion, to develop faith, and so forth. So that's another way of understanding why it's important to, at least sometimes, use analysis and conceptualization. But again, not just any kind of thoughts, any kind of concepts, but very specific ones, ones that help us to generate more love, more compassion, bodhicitta, the aspiration to become enlightened, and so forth. These positive qualities, which are an essential part of the path to enlightenment. Does that make sense? So, also in the Tibetan tradition, you may have heard this, I've heard it a number of times, there's this saying that meditating without having listened to teachings is like trying to climb a mountain without hands. Have you heard that one? Yeah, it's quite a graphic example. Sometimes they say without arms. That's really powerful. Can you imagine, you know, if you didn't have any arms and you're trying to climb a mountain? It would be very difficult. So the climbing of the mountain is an analogy for achieving higher states of mind, which are explained in the Buddhist path, enlightenment, nirvana, and even higher states of meditation, even to be able to develop single-pointed concentration, samadhi. You have to understand how to do it. You have to listen to teachings and study to understand the technique, you know, how you actually practice, how you deal with the various problems or obstacles that you might meet along the way, how do you know when you've achieved it, and so forth. So there's a whole body of teachings on how to develop single-pointed concentration. So just sitting down and trying to meditate without knowing, you know, what you're doing, it's a little risky. You know, you might get there, but you might also go off on some sidetrack and fall off the mountain. So, and in recent years, I love attending teachings by the Dalai Lama whenever I can, and I've been hearing him talk a lot about how important it is to study. And for example, when he's in India and he's teaching to groups of people that consist mostly of Tibetans, including a lot of lay people. I mean, the monks and the nuns, they usually study. In the Gelugpa tradition, they usually study for 15 or 20 years, studying the classical texts of the Indian tradition, the Nalanda tradition. But there's this tendency among the lay people, the lay Tibetan people, to not study. In fact, in Tibet, most of them were illiterate. They didn't even know how to read. But that's changing now. So more and more Tibetans are able to read. They have a good education system, so all the kids can learn how to read. And so His Holiness is encouraging the Tibetan people to study. And apparently they are, Now they're getting into this habit of studying and also even debating. Even the lay people are doing this debating practice, which is also something to sharpen your mind, sharpen your intelligence. And I also heard the Dalai Lama say that, there's also this tradition in Tibet of doing long retreats, like 3-year retreats. Have you heard about that? There's some retreat centers here in the West where people do 3-year retreats. So it's quite amazing, to go into a retreat for 3 years. Some people do even 2 or 3 such retreats. But His Holiness says, if you go into retreats like that, but you haven't really studied, you haven't really, learned the whole path to enlightenment, it's not sure how beneficial that is. And he said that the best scenario is to first study, really study the classical texts that explain the whole path to enlightenment and explain emptiness, the true nature of things which we need to develop wisdom, to really familiarize yourself with all of that material, then go into retreat, because then you really know what you're doing. And you're less likely to make mistakes in your practice, you're more likely to succeed in your practice, and so on. So I'm going to talk a little, I'm going to go through some of the benefits of study that are mentioned in one of the texts. But before I do that, just to mention that it also depends on what your goal is. Like in Buddhism, we talk about these goals of these higher states of mind, enlightenment, or Buddhahood, nirvana, liberation. And those states of mind are really special because when you achieve them, it means that you are free of suffering. You have no more suffering, no more problems. You have no more ignorance, no more disturbing emotions like anger, hatred, fear, jealousy, pride, and so forth. So your mind is like completely clear, free of all those disturbing emotions, and you have only positive emotions, positive states of mind like love and compassion and wisdom, of course. So they're like extraordinary states of mind, and with those states of mind, then your ability to benefit others is greatly enhanced. You're not going to hurt anybody, for sure, and instead everything you do will be just beneficial for others. So those who are really serious about following the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist path are striving for those goals. And in order to, if that is your goal, if your goal is to achieve one of those states of mind, then definitely it's very important to study so that you know what those goals are and what is the path to achieve them, and so forth. Just like if you want to go on a journey somewhere, let's say you want to go to Tibet. So you need, before you just, walk out the door and start walking down the street and say, bye Mom, I'm going to Tibet, you need to find out, well, where exactly is Tibet and how do you get there? And what do you need for the journey? Do I need a visa before I go, and so forth. So it's just intelligent to understand first where you're going and how you get there before you just make a journey. So in the same way, if we want to achieve enlightenment or nirvana, one of these higher states of mind, it just makes sense that we know about those states of mind, what's involved in them, and what we have to do in order to achieve them. But on the other hand, not everybody, for example, in the West, there are a lot of people who want to practice meditation, but they don't necessarily want to achieve enlightenment. Their wish may be just to be more relaxed, to deal with stress, to deal with emotional problems, to deal with physical problems, health problems, and so forth. And that's their goal. So if that's your goal, yeah, if that's why you want to practice meditation, then maybe not necessary to do so much study. You just need to know how to meditate properly so that you will have less stress rather than more stress. Because, I mean, that's possible. If you don't meditate properly, you may end up more stressed, more unhappy, having more problems than before. So, but anyway, you know, how much you need to know about the path and about meditation will depend on what your goal is. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah. So I'm talking more in the traditional Buddhist sense of someone who wants to achieve the goals that are mentioned in Buddhism. And if that is the case, then it is important to study. But it also depends on time. And I know there are people who really want to study, but don't have much time because of all the things that are the responsibilities. You have a job, you have family, you have bills to pay, elderly parents to look after, and so on. So you may have just a lot of responsibilities and not a lot of time to give to study, because it does take a lot of time. I mean, like the monks and nuns, Tibetan monks and nuns in the monasteries who are doing these study programs, that's all they do, pretty much, you know, from early morning until late at night. Of course, they have to eat and sleep sometimes, but most of their time is dedicated to studying and debating, going to classes, memorizing texts. They memorize all the texts that they study, so they know them by heart. It's quite amazing. And so on. So if you're a monk or nun, then you have that kind of time. But people who are not, who have families and jobs and so forth, then you have less time. But even if you don't have a whole lot of time, it's still, you can still try to find time to study. When there's teachings, for example, I'm sure you do anyway, when a Lama comes or a teacher comes and is giving teachings, you can go and listen to the teachings. You can have a book, and even if you only read 1 page a day, or 2 pages or 3 pages, you can just slowly get your way through the book. So I think if we really want to, we can find time to increase our knowledge of the Dharma. But of course, we also need to practice. So I'm not saying give up practicing. Don't practice and just study. Try to do both. Try to spend some of your time meditating and some of your time studying. So the studying in Buddhism, study isn't the same as like in university. When we study in a university, I think in most cases it's not. The idea isn't that you practice what you're learning. Actually. I don't know if you've heard of Jack Kornfield. Jack Kornfield is one of the earliest American people to start learning Buddhism and practice Buddhism. And he, became a teacher and author of a number of books. And in one of his books, he said that when he went to university, he was studying Western philosophy. But he was somewhat disillusioned by it because it was just information, but there was nothing said about how you practice it, how you bring it into your life, how you use it in your life. It was more just like all these ideas, yeah, great to think about, great to talk about, but what does it have to do with your life? And I think I remember Joseph Goldstein also. He's another of the early American Western people to start learning Buddhism, and he's a great Vipassana teacher and author of a number of books. I think he said the same thing, that he also studied Western philosophy in university, but felt like, well, yeah, but what has this got to do with my life? And so they both set off for India, for Asia, and began learning Buddhism, because Buddhist philosophy is quite different. It's meant to be practiced. The more you learn about the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist path, the more you learn about how to live your life in a way that is most beneficial, most peaceful, most beneficial for yourself, beneficial for others. So it's all about how to live, how to practice, and especially how to work on your mind, how to transform your mind. So it's full of information about that. So it's definitely meant to be practiced, and not just to acquire knowledge that you can talk about to other people and make a big impression on other people and so forth. But it's all meant to be practiced, to work on your mind, to subdue your mind. Okay, so now I have this list of benefits from a classic text, but maybe before going into that, we could have a break. Would you like to have a break now? Yeah, let's say 5-10 minutes break. just thought to go through this list of benefits of listening to and studying the Dharma. And this comes from an ancient Buddhist text called the Jataka Tales. Have you heard of the Jataka Tales? They're a collection of stories about the previous lives of the Buddha, because the Buddhist view is that the Buddha, the person we call Buddha, had spent many, many lifetimes as a bodhisattva. That means he was trying to become a Buddha, perfecting himself, practicing generosity and ethics and patience and so on for many lifetimes, creating the causes to become a Buddha, and then finally he achieved Buddhahood. So the Jataka Tales are tales about his past lives, his former lives, and the wonderful things that he did. And there's a few different versions in English, versions of these stories. And they've also made a few of them as children's books. One company in America have taken some of the Jataka Tales and made children's books with drawings and very simple kind of language, and they teach lessons, beneficial lessons for children. Anyway, so from that text, the collection of Jataka Tales, there's a list of these benefits of listening to and studying the Dharma. And I found this list in Lama Tsongkhapa's text that I mentioned before, the Lamrim Chenmo, which there's a 3-volume English translation. I don't know if you have it here in the library. It was translated into English, and it's such a big book. They put it into 3 volumes. So from there come these 10 benefits. So some of these you may not relate to. You may not understand or feel that they're relevant for you, but hopefully at least 1 or 2 of them will ring a bell in you and help you feel interested in learning more. Okay, so the first benefit is that study is like a lamp, a light, to dispel the darkness of ignorance. So studying and learning helps us to develop wisdom, and wisdom, as I mentioned before, is the antidote, the remedy to ignorance, ignorance being the main problem that we have, the main cause of our suffering and our problems. So the more we study, the more we'll develop wisdom, and our ignorance will decrease. Just like a lamp eliminates darkness, a light eliminates darkness. So study and learning eliminates the darkness of ignorance. And the second one, it is the best of possessions, because thieves cannot rob you of it. So thieves can, break into our house and take our money and our jewelry and our nice things. But the knowledge, the understanding that we have of the Dharma is something that nobody can steal from us. Can't be taken away by anybody. So it's always there, always with us. And it can be beneficial also in times of difficulty, like if you do get robbed or if you face other kinds of misfortune, problems in your life. The Dharma, the knowledge, the understanding of the Dharma that you have can be extremely beneficial for you at those difficult times. For example, last year a friend, somebody I was working with as well, he has 3 daughters. The youngest daughter became very, very, very ill with some, I can't remember what the problem was, but anyway, she wasn't able to eat. She was getting really, really thin and very weak, and eventually they had to do an operation. So it was just a really stressful time for him and his wife and his family. And he said that he had been, learning Dharma and practicing Dharma for many years, and it was during that difficult time that the Dharma became so helpful for him. It was just like a lifesaver. something that really, really helped him to get through those difficulties. So this is, you've probably had experience like this as well, of the Dharma being a very precious possession, a non-material possession, an internal spiritual possession. It's something that's really, really helpful to us when we have difficulties. And the third benefit is it's a weapon to defeat your real enemy, your blindness, your confusion about things, or we could also say ignorance. So I'm American, and many of my fellow Americans are really interested in having weapons, guns. You've probably heard about this big debate about guns. So especially because there's been some terrorist attacks in America, and so a lot of people want to have a gun to protect themselves. And from the Buddhist point of view, the real enemy, our real enemy, of course there may be enemies out there, people who want to harm us, and we do need to take steps to protect ourselves. But Buddhism says our real enemy is within ourselves, our own disturbing emotions, our anger, our hatred, our greed, our jealousy, our ignorance, and so forth. So these states of mind that are distorted, that see things in a distorted way, disturb our mind, disturb our life, those are the real enemy. And we can't fight those with guns, with knives, with atom bombs. But the way to overcome those enemies is Dharma, the wisdom of Dharma, the knowledge of Dharma. So with that as a weapon, we will be able to overcome and protect ourselves from and free ourselves from the real enemy. And the fourth benefit is that it is our best friend who gives us the best advice. For example, how to deal with problems, external problems, internal problems, how to deal with problems in ways that are skillful and enable us to eliminate problems or even transform them into things that are positive and beneficial. So anyway, the point is it's like a friend, like a really good friend. And friends, ideally, good friends are people who can give us advice, good advice, when we have problems or going through difficulties. We like to turn to our friends and they give us advice and comforting words and so forth. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes friends don't give us good advice. Sometimes they can make things worse. So Dharma is like a friend that will not let us down, will not give us bad advice, but always give us good advice. And then the fifth benefit, it says it's a relative who will not desert you even if you are poor. Because it says that, I don't know if this is true or not, but some people who are our friends or relatives are there when things are going well for us, when we have plenty of money and things are going well. But if we run into hard times, like if we lose money, we aren't doing very well, sometimes friends and relatives can desert us. I don't know if that's true or not. Have you ever had that experience of people kind of dumping you, deserting you when you really need help? I've heard of that happening. It's very sad, but apparently that does happen sometimes. But the Dharma will never do that. Dharma will never dump us, will never leave us, will never desert us when we have problems. And in fact, as I mentioned before, when we do face difficulties and problems, the Dharma will be there to help us get through that period of time. So be a good friend. And then sixth, it's like medicine against sorrow that doesn't do you any harm, unlike, some medicine has adverse side effects. So you take medicine to cure one problem, but sometimes it gives you other problems. But the Dharma is like medicine that doesn't have unpleasant side effects. So it doesn't do any harm. It doesn't make things worse for us. As long as we understand it properly. I mean, it's possible to misunderstand Dharma, to practice it incorrectly, and then we may run into problems. But if we do have a correct understanding of it and correct practice of it, then it will really help us. Yeah, and I can mention my own experience. In the last couple of years, I had to go for several operations, and this was the first time in my life that I had to be in a hospital and have operations, and it was a little scary. But I could really see that Dharma helped me, like doing some prayers and practices before the operation really helped me to be in a strong state of mind and not be so afraid. And I think it also helped to recover quickly. And I've heard that they say this in Western medicine as well, that your state of mind has a lot to do with your health and what's going on with your body. So if your mind is disturbed by fear, anxiety, depression, anger, and so forth, then it will affect your body and affect your ability to heal or to recover from something like an operation. But if your mind is really strong and positive, then that will affect your body and enable you to recover more quickly. So I could really see that in my experience. So it is like really good medicine for the mind, but also having an effect on the body. And then the seventh, a little hard for me to relate to, but it says, it's the best army which defeats all the forces of negativities, like delusions, negative karma, and so forth. So these are sometimes compared to enemies or foes because they harm us and can lead us to experience suffering, not just in this life, but also future lives as well. And so the knowledge that we have of Dharma will enable it, like an army, will enable us to overcome these enemies, these foes. And in fact, there's a term, I don't know if you've heard this term, in Sanskrit it's arhat. Arhat is a person who has attained nirvana. That means they've completely freed their mind from all the disturbing emotions, ignorance, greed, hatred, pride, jealousy. So all the negative emotions, disturbing emotions have been totally cleared away. And they've attained this state of peace, no more suffering. And so this term arhat in the Tibetan language, it's a drachomba, and that literally means foe destroyer. Someone who has destroyed all the foes, not external foes, not enemies, people out there, but the internal ones of the disturbing emotions. So they do use that kind of language of destroying foes, but it needs to be understood that it's internal rather than external. Does that make sense? Yeah, because Buddhism teaches us to be compassionate and not kill or harm anybody. But when it comes to our ignorance, then that's something we want to overcome, to defeat. And then the eighth benefit, it's the best treasure or wealth. Better than having millions of dollars or euros or kroners or whatever kind of money you want. And it also is the best way to achieve fame and glory. Now these are things that ordinary people in the world are interested in. They want wealth, they want fame, they want glory. But you often hear stories about people who do achieve a lot of wealth and fame and so forth, but they're not necessarily happy, and sometimes they even commit suicide, or they become addicted to drugs, alcohol, and so forth. So clearly they're not unhappy. They're not happy, even though they've achieved these high levels of wealth and so forth. So it shows that just having wealth and fame and glory in the external sense is not a guarantee of happiness and being able to live a good life. Whereas with the knowledge of Dharma, then this will give us not necessarily material wealth, but a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of happiness and inner qualities, positive qualities. So it's the best kind of wealth. And also it can bring fame and glory. For example, the Dalai Lama, he's someone who's, he's not wealthy. He's just a simple Buddhist monk, as he always says, but he's very well known all over the world. Sometimes he's even called like a superstar, Dalai Lama superstar. Because, wherever he goes, there's thousands of people, tens of thousands of people wanting to go and see him and, hear him and so forth. And he's happy. He's not someone who's likely to commit suicide or get addicted to drugs and alcohol. A lot of joy. And then the ninth benefit says that due to the study of Dharma, learning Dharma, then you have the best gift when meeting high people. I didn't really find any explanation of that, but again, I was thinking about the Dalai Lama, because he often meets high people. He meets presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens and leaders of countries and scientists and so forth, movie stars. So he meets all these people in high positions, and he doesn't have much. He just wears very simple robes and doesn't have money, and so he's quite a simple person. But he's always very smiling and warm and friendly, and I think he really wins hearts. He wins people's hearts. They're really touched by him. Not everybody, of course. I heard some people don't like him, but many people do like him, even if they're not Buddhist. So I think it's because of his Dharma knowledge and practice and his inner qualities. So with that, he's able to make a really positive connection, a strong connection with people, including people in high positions. And then the 10th benefit is it's the best way to gain the respect of scholars in any gathering. And so I think, as before, the point isn't to have Dharma knowledge so that we can show off how smart we are, how much we know, and have pride and arrogance about that. Not that, but just that the knowledge that we have of Dharma, the qualities that we have through practicing Dharma are really good. They're good qualities. And if we bring those into our relationships, our connections with other people, then there's a pretty good chance that they will respect us. And if they respect us, then they're more likely to listen to us. So the point isn't to be respected by people, but to have a good connection with them so that they will listen to us and learn from us and hopefully benefit from us. Not that we want to convert them to Buddhism, but if we are living the qualities that the Buddha taught, love and compassion and kindness and humility and so forth. And those are positive qualities that will help others to develop the same positive qualities. And also hopefully inspire them to do more positive things in their life. And I was thinking of an example of this. Have you heard of the Mind and Life conferences? Yeah, they've been going on for 30 years now, because the Dalai Lama was really interested in science. He wanted to know more about Western science, and so they started about 30 years ago having conferences between Western scientists, philosophers, psychologists, and the Dalai Lama. So I think they have one of these every year, and the last one they had in December they held it in South India, but they have all the sessions on YouTube. You can watch them, really interesting. And there was one, he's actually an Indian scientist. I don't remember if he was a scientist or a doctor or whatever, but living in America. And he was talking about a project that he and his colleagues started, which combines research into blindness. They wanted to do research into blindness, so they were doing the research in a way that was benefiting blind children. There's a lot of children born in India who are blind from birth, and they don't always have access to medical treatment and even education, to be able to deal with their problem. So they managed to get funding, I think, from the U.S. government to do this project. So they're bringing these children in and working with them to try to overcome their blindness. And so it's a research project, but it's also benefiting real people. So he said this was something they were inspired by these Mind and Life conferences, because the Dalai Lama is often talking about how important it is to use science and research and so forth in ways that are beneficial to others and not just trying to find information. So that's just an example of how meeting with the Dalai Lama, for example, can inspire other people to be more altruistic, to use their life, their work in ways that benefit others. Okay, so those are the 10 benefits that might be helpful for you to see the benefits of learning more. And just a few other things. And then I'll stop and you can ask questions. Just some real life examples in the latest issue of Mandala magazine. I don't know if any of you see this or read this. This particular issue is talking about the Gelugpa tradition and certain developments and innovations in the Gelugpa tradition. And there's an article in here by a monk from Holland, a Dutch monk named Tenzin Namdak, who just recently completed his studies. He's been studying in Sera Monastery for 19 years. So he learned Tibetan and then followed the traditional curriculum that leads to becoming a geshe, which is like a doctor of philosophy in Buddhist philosophy. So there's been a few Western monks and one Western nun who have completed this curriculum, which is really hard. I mean, to learn Tibetan and then have to memorize all the texts in Tibetan and do the debating in Tibetan and live in India for all those years with the hardships of living in India and so on. So it's quite an accomplishment. So in this issue, he's just talking about his experience of going through that program, and he talks about how in the beginning, when he first started learning Buddhism, he wasn't really keen to study. He just wanted to meditate, just wanted to practice, go into retreat and so on. But his teachers, some of his teachers, encouraged him to learn Tibetan and study. So he did, and managed to finish after 19 years. And he said he's very grateful that his teachers did give him that advice, because he said it was a really beneficial experience. So he says, I have seen many benefits over the years and have been inspired by the teachers who are great products of this profound system. Study and practice should not be seen as contradictory. We need both on the path to enlightenment. So we need to do both study and practice, meditation, contemplation. So they enhance each other. And he also said that study itself is a kind of practice. Okay, so we shouldn't make this separation that there's study over here and there's practice over here. But when we're studying, that itself is practice. I mean, when you think about it, what they do is quite amazing, to memorize, pages and pages and pages of Buddhist texts. So committing that to memory, committing those words to memory, meaning, it becomes part of you. It becomes part of your mind. And I've seen this with some of my teachers. They're in their 80s and they're still able to quote, just from memory. to, you know, all these amazing texts. So just imagine what that would be like to have all that knowledge there in your mind, in your memory banks. That itself would be so beneficial. And also I've seen that for myself. I've tried memorizing a few little texts that I can manage. And what I notice sometimes is when you're in a certain situation, and maybe there's some problem happening, some difficult situation happening, and one of these verses will pop up in my mind, you know, something from one of these texts. And it's almost like my mind is telling me, oh, now this is the time when you need to think about that and meditate on that and use that. So I can imagine if you had whole texts of, you know, of wonderful advice on how to be a better person, how to become enlightened and so on, that you know, it's like those words would be teaching you all the time. So anyway, that's just sharing a little bit of his experience. And in my own experience, I had the chance to do some study for a couple of years when I was in my 20s. I was already a nun then, and I was living in England, and we did some study of some of the classic texts, and I really enjoyed it. But then changes happened, and I ended up the next 25 years working and teaching in centers and so on. I didn't have much time to study, but I still felt this wish to study. And then some years ago, I had another opportunity to go back and do more study in Italy. There's this program called the Master's Program, which is a six-year program. And it's a program where they, well, Kaisha did it as well, my classmate. So we have a chance to study some of the great Indian classical Buddhist texts, the same texts that the monks and nuns study in the monasteries. Really wonderful, amazing text. And there aren't many places where you can study those texts unless you go into the monasteries. But there you have to learn Tibetan and do it all in Tibetan. So we were very fortunate that we were able to do it in English. And so I was really, really happy to have the chance to do that program. And it's almost like, you know, going into these texts and exploring them and finding out what's in them. And it's just amazing stuff. It just really opens doors. It opens up your knowledge about the Buddhist path. And it's incredible. And also, usually in our tradition, like for Western people, what we are taught is the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment, which, you know, teaches you the step-by-step path to enlightenment. But it doesn't really tell you everything. There's a lot of gaps in the material. So when you study these great classical texts, it fills in the gaps. It fills in. You get so much more material to understand the whole path to enlightenment and how to practice it and so on. So I feel it's been really helpful for me in my understanding of the Buddhist path and my practice, and also as a teacher, you know, to be able to share with others whatever I've learned. So last year I was asked to come and be the teacher in the center in Copenhagen, and I was asked specifically to teach what's called the basic program. It's a study program. I was studying some of the classic texts, and the idea was to share this program with people in the Nordic and Baltic countries like Sweden and Finland, Latvia, and so on. So I was really happy to have that invitation and have this opportunity to come. So we're going to start the basic program. It's called basic program, but it's actually not really basic. It's quite advanced. But we're going to start it in September. But in the meantime, between now and then, we're offering this kind of preparatory program to the basic program, just exploring some of the topics of Buddhist philosophy, so people get a taste of that and see whether they like it or not. And so that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I'm going to be starting this. So we call this program Exploring Buddhist Philosophy and it has 4 modules. So the first module was on the 4 Noble Truths, and that's finished already. And now tomorrow we're starting the second module, which is on the 2 Truths. So this is a really interesting topic in Buddhist philosophy. It's challenging, but it's also very kind of juicy, interesting. So I'll start talking about that tomorrow, and anyone who is interested to come is welcome to do so. But we'll also do some meditation. It's not only going to be talking, but also some practice of meditation. Okay, so that's as much as I had to say, and I've said a lot. So I'll stop now, and if anyone would like to ask a question, I'd be happy to try to answer.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In the Master's program, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of texts do you read?
Yeah. Well, the first text that we studied is called the Abhidhamma Kosha. It translates as the Ornament of Clear Realization. And this is considered a really important text. The author is actually Maitreya, Maitreya Buddha. And there are various commentaries to that text to explain it, because it's very, the verses of the root text are very, very short and not self-explanatory. So then there's many commentaries to it. But basically it just teaches the Bodhisattva path to enlightenment. It explains everything the Bodhisattva needs to do to reach enlightenment. So it's contains a lot of material. And in the monasteries, like Sarah Monastery and so on, they usually spend 6 or 7 years just studying that text, together with some other, they study some other texts along with it as well. So that was the first text we did, and we did it in 1.5 years, I think. Shortened version. And then the second text we did was the Madhyamika Vitara, and that's composed by Chandrakirti, and it's all about emptiness. It's not all about emptiness. It's also about the Bodhisattva's path. You've heard of the 6 perfections? Well, there's also a list of 10 perfections. So it's the 6 plus 4. So there's 1 chapter for each of the perfections and how to practice the perfection. And then the 6th perfection is the perfection of wisdom. So most of the text consists of that, the perfection of wisdom. So it goes into emptiness, the 2 truths. It's really mind-blowing. And that's another one of the texts they study in the monasteries. I think they spend 4 years studying that one. But we did it in 2. And then the third text we did was the Abhidhamma Kosha. And this is a text by an Indian master named Vasubandhu. And it's, Abhidharma is sometimes called phenomenology. It's sort of categorizing all the different kinds of phenomena in the world, putting them into different categories, talking about their properties, their qualities, and so forth. And the purpose of this is to get a clear understanding of what does exist and what doesn't exist. Because this is one of our big problems, ignorance. You know, we believe in things that actually don't exist. We're sort of hallucinating, dreaming a lot of the time. And so to be able to know what doesn't exist, we need to know what does exist. So that's the real purpose of understanding that. And that's a really interesting text. I liked it. Some people didn't like it. It was too complicated, but I really liked it. And also there's 1 whole chapter about karma. It goes into all the details of karma. Another whole chapter about delusions, afflictive emotions, going into all the details about that. 1 whole chapter about cosmology, Buddhist cosmology, talking about all the different realms of existence and so on. So that was another text. We did that in a really shortened, I think they spent a couple of years in the monasteries. We did it in, I think, less than 1 year. It was quite fast. And then the last 2 topics were related to Tantra. So we studied a general topic, a general text on Tantra, the stages and paths of Tantra, and then one text on a particular Tantra, the Gaudiya Samaja Tantra. So that's what we did in the master's program. A lot of material, but very interesting. Yeah.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Huh?
Can I have a follow-up
Yeah.
question? I'm curious about this Sangata Sutra.
Sangata Sutra? Yeah.
Yeah, you know?
I've read it a
pronouncing
few
correctly?
times.
Okay,
Yeah.
So learning about it, could you help me, give me some pointers? Just reading it, perhaps?
Yeah, I haven't heard of or seen any commentaries, any explanations of it.
Okay.
They may exist, but they haven't been translated into English, so I don't know about that. Yeah. Yeah, I think in the Tibetan tradition, the texts that they study are mostly Indian commentaries to the sutras. Because they say in the Mahayana tradition, the main sutras for the Mahayana tradition are the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And there's a number of different perfections. They're actually quite difficult to understand. Perfection of Wisdom sutra, you're probably not going to understand very much. So that's why the Indian commentaries are explanations of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And then they also have Tibetan commentaries to the Indian commentaries, because even the Indian commentaries are often difficult to understand. So I think it's not too difficult to understand that, because, for example, in literature, for example, English literature, if you go back and read Chaucer or, writers, even Shakespeare, the kind of language they used, it was common at that time, but if you try to read it now, it's very hard to understand. So that may be one reason, the differences in language over the centuries, the way of talking, the way of saying things. So, yeah. Yeah, Buddhist philosophy is pretty vast and amazing. Yeah.
I have a question, maybe it's irrelevant, but I feel some kind of urge to ask it. You as a Buddhist nun, since so long time, did you meet some difficulties in this traditional, as a woman, I think?
Yeah. Being a Buddhist nun and being a woman, did I meet difficulties?
Yeah. Because I hear sometimes, it was not so many days ago, someone told me that there is a Tibetan Lama saying in YouTube maybe that women cannot be enlightened, and I think it's very strange. But he's a Buddhist practitioner since a very long time, and he said, yeah, it is there, you can listen to it, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, there are such statements in some texts, and also even in contemporary teachings there are people who say such things. So it's a sort of controversial topic, as you can imagine. My own personal experience, my main teachers, the teachers I've been following mainly, were Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And I never felt any prejudice or any discrimination for being a woman. In fact, Lama Yeshe was particularly kind of, fair-minded and, I don't know the word, that, really related well with women. Women could really relate to him, he could relate to them. I mean, it was said that when he was a child, he was recognized as the reincarnation of an abbess, a nun, who was in charge of a monastery or a nunnery in the area where he was born. So it looks like he was a woman in his last life, and so maybe for that reason he has, better understanding of women and better way of teaching women. So my experience, I was never, told, oh, you can't be enlightened because you're a woman, you can't do this because you're a woman. That never happened to me. But I have heard stories of others who did have that kind of experience. It is changing. Like in Tibet, my understanding was the nuns didn't have much opportunity to study. There were nuns, they lived in monasteries, but mostly they just did recitations, like reciting prayers and so on, but not much chance to study. So when they came out of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, he's another very fair-minded person, he wanted to make sure that nuns had the same opportunity to study as monks. So they developed study programs for nuns, and now they've made it possible for nuns to get the Geshe degree. This is just a recent innovation. There's one, the first female Geshe, she's a German nun, Kelsang Wangmo, but there are others who are on the way, they're going to take their exams. That's another article in here about that. A couple of nuns who've completed their studies and they're preparing for the exams to get the Geshe degree. So that's, yeah.
I just thought that it's maybe a result of the patriarchal culture as everywhere else, this discrimination of females or nuns. But Buddhism as itself, at the end, in any case, if you go on the Vajrayana path, there is no difference between female or male mind. It's all about mind. So
Yeah.
at the end, both of females and men can reach enlightenment.
Yeah.
Because this was told to me by a Theravada monk from many, many years ago. I
Yeah.
go often and he said, no, but Theravada, they don't practice Vajrayana.
Yeah.
There's no
But even,
difference.
even at the time of the Buddha, this isn't so well known, but there were many female disciples of the Buddha who attained arhatship, they attained nirvana. And there's a wonderful book called The First Buddhist Women, if you're interested. It's really, really interesting. The First Buddhist Women, written by an American woman who has similar issues, like, where are the women? Most of the teachers are men and so on. So she did a lot of research and made translations of these poems. So what happened was, at the time of the Buddha, when one of his disciples attained arhatship, they attained nirvana, freed their mind from all their delusions and so on, they would often express their attainment in a poem. They'd say some just verse to express what they've achieved. And so these are part of the canon, the collection of Buddhist literature. And there's one called a Taragata, which are the gathas, the verses of the elders, the male elders. And then there's the Tarigata, the gathas, the verses of the female elders. So these are part of the Buddhist canon. So she translated the Tarigata, some of the Tarigata, and tried to get stories about these women. It's really, really interesting.
What's her name?
Susan Murdoch. Murdoch. But just look up The First Buddhist Women, that's the name of the book. It's really interesting because she also did a lot of research about the situation of women at the time of the Buddha. What kind of opportunities women had and didn't have and so on. And so anyway, it's clear that a woman can, I think the issue is more about becoming a Buddha, becoming a fully enlightened Buddha. And my hunch is because in some of the text it describes the marks and signs of a Buddha. There's the 32 major and 80 minor marks of a Buddha, the Buddha's physical body. And when you look at those marks, it seems clear that it's talking about a male body. However, Geshe Gyatso, who was the previous teacher of the master's program in Italy, I can't remember exactly, but he was asked this question, and he said, no, it can be a woman too. So it's a question of interpretation. How do you interpret these marks of a Buddha's body? You could interpret them to say, no, it's only men, it's only men. Or you could interpret them in a different way. So I think...
Not in woman's body.
Sorry?
I heard it not when we are in woman's body.
Well, I think this may be...
Is the main thing.
Yeah, it's the mind. That's the important thing. And that's why, like in the Vajrayana, His Holiness has said this, in the Vajrayana text, it's very clear that you can become enlightened whether you're male or female. But the Theravada tradition doesn't have those texts. So anyway, it's a controversial issue. But I think we shouldn't let that be a a hindrance. You know, I just think we just have to keep practicing and do the best we can and help others.
Yeah.
Huh?
You just need to prove them wrong.
Yeah.
It's all about the mind. Actually. Can you tell more about tomorrow's teachings about the truth?
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm starting. I'm not going to cover the whole topic tomorrow, but I'll start tomorrow and then I'll continue for a few more weeks back in Copenhagen. But the videos will be online. So I'm talking about the two truths. So this is I don't know if this topic exists in the Theravada tradition, but it's in the Mahayana tradition. So the two truths are relative truth and ultimate truth. And it has to do with just the world and what exists. And relative or conventional truth has to do with just how things appear to us, how things ordinarily exist, like our bodies and our minds, human beings, cities, towns, villages, cars, the earth, and so on. So all of that is the realm of relative or conventional truth, conventional reality. And then ultimate truth has to do with the real meaning or the real nature, the real way that all of these things exist. So I think it sort of answers a question that's probably, many people have been thinking about, going back to the Greek philosophers, maybe even before that, like wondering, is this all there is? Like normal, everyday reality, like nowadays a lot of people wonder, okay, so you're born and you're a kid, you play for a while, then you go to school, and then you finish school, you get a job, you get married, have kids, raise a family, then you get old and you die. Is that all there is? What's this all about? Or is there something more? Is there, more than just this? Is there another way of seeing things, another way of living, another reality to things? So that kind of question that people often wonder about, philosophers, but also ordinary people wonder about that. So the two truths is dealing with that, how things exist in an ordinary, relative, conventional way, as opposed to how things really exist. What is the real nature, the real truth? And within Buddhism, there are different points of view about this, different ways of explaining this. And if you're exposed to Lam Rim or other kinds of teachings, you've probably heard about the Madhyamika point of view, how the Madhyamika Prasangika explain relative truth and ultimate truth. And that's where they talk about emptiness. Have you heard of emptiness, Shunyata? Okay, so emptiness is ultimate truth, according to this particular school, the Madhyamika Prasangika. But that's actually something very, very subtle, very deep, very difficult to understand. And there are other ways of explaining the two truths by other schools of philosophy, which, in one sense it makes the whole thing very complicated, but in another way, understanding, going through the different schools, the ones that are more gross, not so subtle, can help you, like steps in a ladder, helps you to progress, to be able to understand the Madhyamika Prasangika, which is the highest but the most difficult and most subtle point of view. So that's what I'm going to be doing, talking about how the two truths are explained by the different schools. And we'll also do some meditation. It's not just going to be blah blah, but we'll do some meditation as well. Does that sound very complicated? It's really interesting. I don't know, for me it's very interesting. But it's also very important because they say that it's our failure to understand ultimate truth, emptiness, that is our main problem, the main cause of our suffering. And if we really want to be free of suffering, free of all our disturbing thoughts and emotions and all our problems, we need to understand emptiness. So the wisdom understanding emptiness is like the ultimate antidote, the ultimate medicine to our problems and our suffering. So it isn't just some intellectual thing, you know, some interesting thing, but it's very much relevant to our life and to the path to liberation and enlightenment. Okay, so let's finish by mentally dedicating a positive energy that we have created by coming together, doing meditation, and trying to do all of these things with a good motivation, an altruistic motivation, wishing to benefit ourselves and others, the whole world. So having that motivation and staying here and doing these things has been very good. We've created some good energy, positive energy. So now let's dedicate this positive energy, share it with others, with the wish that it will bring benefit, peace, happiness, freedom from suffering, freedom from war and violence and crime and all the different kinds of problems that exist in the world among humans. And may it help us all get closer to enlightenment, which is the fulfillment of our highest potential. Okay, so thank you. Good night.